Casey Glass again. This time for Hillsong Omnisphere group on Facebook. And I had a couple questions about how to sample Omnisphere into a Nord Stage 2. So a couple of real quick upfront things just so that we're all on the same page. Number one, the Spectrasonics license for Omnisphere specifically prohibits you from sharing samples you make from Omnisphere. So you can sample for your own use, but you can't sample and share. Number two is that you cannot recreate an Omnisphere patch by sampling it. You can only get close. So, for example, I like to have a couple of my favorites from Omnisphere in my Nord stage. If I have to go do a lightweight gig, if my computer's not working, whatever, I have access to some of those sounds through my Nord stage. And it won't be the same, but it will be similar. So, at any rate, here we go. So what I like to do is in Logic, we're going to go ahead and set up a couple of tracks. One is going to be an instrument track with Omnisphere. The other track is going to be an audio track, and we're going to set it up so that Omnisphere's output goes to a bus, and that audio track's input is also that same bus. So in other words, the audio comes out of Omnisphere into this audio track, and from there it can go out to our output so that we can hear it. All right. So in Omnisphere, we're going to go ahead and pick our favorite patches that we want to sample. And so, let's see here. One of my favorites, we don't need a multi, is the hum whistle pad. So ambient hum whistle, lots of fun. So we're going to load that one. We want to do a couple of things. In the main page, we want to go to Controls and make sure that the cutoff filter is all the way open, because we want to make sure that later on we'll use the filter that's in the Nord, and we don't want to have sampled whatever filter setting is preset with the patch in Omnisphere. Next, we want to go to the Edit tab and make sure that the attack is set to nothing, and usually make the release pretty short. And we need to do this for each layer of the patch. So attack, nothing, release, short-ish. We don't want the release to be 0 because the sound will cut off kind of unnaturally, and that might not be so awesome. Now you have to make a choice. You need to look at the filter and decide if you want to also 0 that out. This is one of the areas where we really cannot exactly replicate what Omnisphere is doing. We cannot reproduce the filter. We can only basically record whatever the filter did. And so those are kind of the compromises that you make. The last thing we do after we set up our patch to have 0 attack, relatively short release, maybe not nothing, but kind of short-ish. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Oh, that was the filter release, that's why. Yeah, we want that to be nothing. All right. Then we're going to go into the effects, and we want to record effects that we are not going to want to reproduce with the synth. So neither of the layers or parts of the patch have their own effects. There's only common effects. We have some compression and a little bit of chorus, and I think probably we'll just leave that as is. The only downside is that the chorus is set to tempo sync, and of course once we've recorded it, we can't do that anymore. And so that may be one reason to not record that. So let's see here. It's probably fine just to leave it the way that it is. So now that we've got the patch set up, we're going to go ahead and set up a trigger track. So this is just a MIDI region in Logic that chromatically goes through, I think about 4 octaves from C1 through C5. And what we have here is whole notes, and we're going to set the tempo low enough that they last for several seconds. And that'll give us enough time to find a good loop point in the middle of the sound. The longer that you're typically going to hold out the sound when you play it, the longer you want the sample to be so that you'll get enough to get a decent sounding loop point. And we're going to do just one note at a time in the piano roll here. So you can see I have start on C0, and then I go every third semitone. So the next is a E flat, then a F sharp, then an A, and then we're back to C. So it rolls around nicely, and then we're just going to copy paste that out for several octaves. We want to go ahead and draw the notes so that their velocities are kind of in the middle of the range. So like this one right here is 60, and actually I probably want them all to be more like 90 or 100. There we go. They all want to be the same, and that way our sampler will get nice consistent input so that the notes all trigger the same, the releases will be the same, the velocity will be the same, and that will make it map nicer. So the next thing we're going to do is make sure that we have record armed our audio track, and we're going to go ahead and record it. So this is going to take, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, guys, so I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and I'll see you back in a minute. Alright guys, we're back. It's a couple minutes later. We have our file. One of the things that we need to do is go ahead and make sure that we have our region selected. We're going to go down to File, Functions, Normalize, and we're good to go there. And then we're going to go to Functions. Actually, we're going to right click on it and go to Export as audio file. Name it something that you can remember. Put it on the desktop and save it away. Alright, that does it for Logic. And now we need to go ahead and open the Nord sample editor. Alright. So we're going to go ahead and add a file. So here it is. We have each of our notes kind of all sampled out there. We need to tell it where that sample starts and the start key. And then how often did we take a note? Every 3 semitones. And once we have that ready, we're going to hit Assign. And it's going to go ahead and break up the sounds based on wherever the sound falls below -45 decibels. In other words, wherever the track becomes silent or almost silent. And so you can see here we have all of our files now mapped across the keyboard. And if I go to audio settings and make sure that we are going to use that, we should be able to hear them. So let's see here. There we go. So that's a file that we took, and you can hear it for as long as it lasted, and then it ends. So if you took really long samples, several seconds, you could just stop there. It'll compress them down and play them. But most of the time, we want to save space on our keyboard and try to loop the samples. I always go for a long loop, and usually we want to start the loop not real close to the beginning, but also not as the end is tailing off there. And most of the time for Omnisphere stuff, we're going to need long crossfades because there's a lot of action happening in there. So let's hear how this one sounds. So I can hear it in there a little bit, but it certainly sounds pretty good. That would definitely work in a chord type setting. So then we need to go through and we need to actually literally adjust the loop for every single one of these. And so in that sense, it's kind of time consuming. Let me just show you what a bad loop would sound like. That one sounds, it's a little bit pronounced, but if we dropped it down at this end, you can hear it kind of beating in there as the loop goes, so we definitely want to kind of move it down here a little bit more. That's pretty nice. So I'm going to just go through here and loop all of these, and I'll pick up at the next step. Alright, there I've gone and adjusted all of my loops. Also, if your samples are not starting at an appropriate time, if it did not catch the beginning of it very well, you can adjust that sample start time. I think on the Nord Electro and some other keyboards. I'm not sure actually if the stage does this or not. I think it may. You can select an alternate start time for your sample. So perhaps you want to cut off a fade that was in there. Maybe you did not change the attack time on the patch, and so it fades in, and you want to have an option for it to start abruptly. You can change that here. And then lastly, on instrument, we're going to change the gains of the patches. So I know for my instrument that I gave them all the same input. So whatever volume it gave me back, I want to keep that. So we're just going to keep all of the volumes the same. And we may just go ahead and bring the overall gain down just a little bit. And then if you want to track gain changes across the keyboard, you can do that. You can detune. You can detune samples. You can change the key, transpose, yada yada. So it's pretty handy there. Now there are a couple of options here for Nord keyboards that have a more limited playback engine. I think that these things are also recalled when you initially pull up the patch. It will play with these settings. So for this patch, we probably want a pretty long attack time, and we don't really need a filter. We probably want the keyboard velocity tracking to be pretty high. The decay time, we definitely we'll make it none, and then release we'll make fairly long. And that is about it. Then at that point, it's a good idea to save your project. So we're going to save this as, I just usually prefix that Omni Ancient Whistle. And I put that in with my other sound libraries for the Nord stage. And we'll save it in there. And my Nord is actually hooked up here, so we can go down to Manager. We can actually generate the instrument, so we can see how much space it's going to take. Usually these take somewhere between 4 and 6 megabytes, and they sound actually really pretty good. So it's been generated, and now you can see that it's kind of cleaning up, and it's going to get ready to go ahead and upload that sound. Now, of course, I can't put everything I love from Omnisphere in there because I only have 20 megabytes free. I could certainly get rid of some other stuff. I tend to only really use maybe 10 or 20 of my synth waves that I keep in there. If you're not familiar with the wave sampling on Nord keyboards, it is not velocity multi-sampled, so you just get the one velocity that we sampled, and you cannot have other velocities. You can do some velocity filter mapping though, so you can get some dynamic changes and things, but you only get the one velocity. And so again, if we're taking something in Omnisphere, we're going to lose a lot of the specialness of it because one of the cool things about Omnisphere is that there's lots of different ways to modulate the signal based on velocity and other stuff, and it's just not the same trying to take some of that out and putting it in another keyboard. I really do love Omnisphere's Adagio strings though, so I've sampled those over. I've never really found a strings that I enjoyed for the Nord, so I really like that one. At any rate, so you can see you can pick some of your favorite patches. You can get maybe what we would consider the essence of that sound and then bring it over to your Nord. And then you just need to go into the synth section, pick this sample as the source for the synth section, and you can go ahead and apply the filter there and do all sorts of other fun stuff. I usually will add delay from the effects section and reverb, some compression, and you can still get very, very impressive sounding pads, even though Omnisphere maybe is not there on the music stand next to you. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks, guys. It's Casey Glass. Bye.